then it's a real hassle to get in again. Just making sure this is actually going to go live. And I'll do, whilst that's happening, I'll just do a quick check to see if there's anyone downstairs. Have you finished at Oracle yet, or is it still?
There are some paperwork remaining, and I'm kind of writing upon paper.
Okay.
Sometimes that will be my last paper maybe.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because we don't do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Some really work.
It's good to get to the end of it. Are you having a bit of a break? I can't remember.
Okay. 2 years, but
at least a few days is better than no go.
yeah, I'm fresh. Ready to go. So it's fine.
Okay, well there's certainly lots and lots to do, so yeah. Just gonna have a quick check of something. Always worthwhile to make sure that the talk's the actual YouTube's actually streaming, because we've been there a few times where we're thinking of streaming, it's going to stream, and then it turns out not to.
The positions to come on Mondays and Wednesdays.
Yeah,
For
the site change team, we come in on Mondays and Wednesdays, and work from home on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays.
Okay.
And it tends to work quite well. So he's on vacation, she's on vacation, and so they'll be back in the office on Wednesday.
Okay.
Yeah, and back on deck, and so we'll all be in. In fact, I think I've got about half a dozen, maybe a dozen people who are going to come along to lunch on the first.
Okay.
So I've got to work out where we're going to eat. Haven't actually thought about that too much yet. No, but under the desk there's a few of these, shoulder things, and if you want to, you can leave your stuff in there. And, some people, there's Chris here, he comes in pretty much every day. And so some people come in, depends on your home situation as to whether it makes sense or works for you to come in all the time or work from home. It's up to you.
Yeah, I'm shifting from houses currently. Lately, my mom's to Rincon and it's like,
oh wow, that's a big move.
yeah, it's basically looking for a house with courtyard for the at least with Rincon, we have the library nearby. It's not like go back to the library.
And whilst you're waiting for more, family digital, digital library doesn't turn out okay. In here, it works pretty good. Yeah. I might go downstairs again just in case we've got a few people. We've got about half a dozen people who said they're coming.
I'm sorry, Peter, should I have gone down to sort of escort people? I thought Chris was there.
Actually, no, Chris is down there.
Okay.
No, and he sends someone up. Yeah, you're right. Actually, you can see him down here. From here.
Yeah.
How's that? Is he waving the sign?
Sign like he's, at the airport.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I guess we don't have to do that. He's covering it. Because, I mean, the thing is, now that we're just send people up the staircase, it's pretty straightforward, isn't it?
Yeah.
In fact, he could point to a room from down there.
Yeah.
And people can see it.
That's right. We wait for that back here.
Yeah. Too right. That. Obviously not to do.
So you think you go wrong?
I started, I think I've been there 4 months now.
No, I've got a little spreadsheet saying where everyone started.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't tell.
I started the last Wednesday of June. So
I'm coming on that.
Yeah, I mean, you can almost measure the errors by consensus and is quantumly different to joining sort of after that December, January, then in 2018, first half, second half. Yeah, so things, the company has evolved drastically each 6 months. And I guess this is
I remember correct.
Yeah.
We would meet on a regular basis at that circle.
Yeah, the whole room was twice the size of that table.
Yeah, that's right.
It was.
And we're all just working away.
Yeah.
That's pretty much the extent of it.
Yeah. And then gravity, which was just chaos.
Yeah.
Gravity was, and they were all about firing people legally. So if you wanted to fire someone but you weren't sure about how to do it legally, you outsourced it. And they fired people legally. And so they did the first warning, second warning, third warning. And I mean they provided a service that was just terrific, being right next to these people. And
I imagine that you might need to engage them or something.
well, we're doing that. We've engaged them. Consensus Australia has engaged them. They want to, just to make sure we're complying with what they call legal compliance of all the laws related to
It was the ones there.
which is very exciting. They're actually got do a really good job, and they know what they're doing. So despite our experience of essentially the main thing we saw was firing people. They did all sorts of stuff.
I sent them him and it's like, that's great. Maybe I'll be able to give you a coin for my side because I don't actually
Explain that.
Yes, you need to. Adrian's not going back before you go. I think so. Yeah, you're going to need some really nice.
All right.
We're going to Osaka. Do you know anyone else from the consensus Brisbane who's going to Osaka?
Who else is going to Osaka from Brisbane?
I think Adrian and Rob Dawson.
I think it's only Adrian and Rob.
Yeah.
I know Adrian's on holidays. He flies literally from his holiday straight out.
Yes.
He's not even come back to Brisbane for it.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
All right. Well, if everyone can take a seat, then that'll be fast. There you go. Hello. Please take a seat.
Where are we taking them?
Okay. All right. Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for coming along today. I know some of you might be going, "Ooh, this is looking a bit hairy. Am I going to survive this?" I promise there is very little maths that's beyond high school in here. Shamir,
That was a long time ago.
That was a long time ago, but it's okay. Whoa, no. Isn't that was a lovely lunch, by the way.
I've enjoyed the talk already. Okay.
Yeah. All right. Now what we've got to do is have this screen here. Yeah, good on you. That's a bit of a delay, isn't it? Okay, so I'm going to talk you through usage. So I like having use cases. How are we actually going to use the technology? How does it work? How does it fit together? And then I'm going to talk you through elliptic curves, pairing, BLS signatures, Shamir's threshold scheme, and then how do you verifiably share a secret, and then talk about the actual threshold signing, and then talk about how you might verify all this on chain. Okay, so usage. So, you know, you've got two people, and you've got, hey everyone, that data there, it came from me. And all these people over here are saying, sure, how can I be sure of that? And so, you know, you might have a private key and a public key, so asymmetric cryptography, have a key pair, and you might distribute the public key, the certificate, and using something called certificate path verification, and then so all of them, so many people have your public key, but only you have your private key. And then the idea is that you use some algorithm to, you know, I was trying to like, and that's open source image, by the way. I didn't like, I didn't, you know, say, hey, sign here.
Yeah, check on the other page.
Yeah. And you have another algorithm, you know, it's two parts of the same thing. That's the signing algorithm, this is a verifying algorithm. And you have your version of the data that you've received, and you combine it with the signature and the public key, and you end up with a ticker across. Yes, it's verified, or no, it didn't verify. And if it verifies, then you know that that data was signed by that private key, and assuming that user hasn't let their private key go astray, you know that the data came from them. So that is what digital signatures are all about. And how you often use this sort of tech is you might have a web browser and you're surfing the internet and you say, I want to go to https://example.com, and you want to have from that server that you've never seen, there's this computer somewhere out there in the ether, and you want to know that that data that's come to you actually comes from them, and they use digital signatures. So they sign it with the server's private key, and you've got a digital certificate which you trust using the certificate path hierarchy, that you can verify that that data came from that web server, came from that computer at the other end of the internet. And so that's how people usually use digital signatures. So what would you use threshold signing for? So I'm working on with the team of people here at Pegasus on atomic cross-chain transactions. And invariably you've got two blockchains. And you've got, in one blockchain you're going, hey, blockchain B, we agree on this data, and it came from us. But that's not quite what you want to say. You want to say a majority of us came to consensus. Because, you know, like in blockchain world, some of those nodes might have been offline, they might not have been able to be connected, or one of them might have been, you know, Byzantine, so they might have said, no, we don't agree with that, and we're not going to sign off on it. So a majority of us came to consensus. And when you say from us, if you're trying to do a private permission blockchain, so an enterprise blockchain, you don't actually want to say who, you know, you want to say us as blockchain A, you don't want to say us as these individual validators. And you don't want to say how many validators there are. You don't even want to say what threshold was you had. You just want to say it came from us, you can trust it. And so this talk is going to talk about how you actually do that. How do you actually have a set of validators over there, and these validators over here can say, I can trust that information came from blockchain A. I don't know the individuals involved, which individuals signed it, and how many individuals signed it. I just know that there is enough of them to make the threshold. And so that's what we're trying to do. And so we're going to use a scheme that is a little bit like this, or it is like this, that you have private key shares, and there's some data, they threshold sign it, then you get some signature shares, you combine it using some M of N scheme, so M, which is the threshold of N, which is the total, to get a threshold signature, and then just using a generic algorithm to be able to verify it using a public key and the data. So that's what we're aiming for. And if you look at this slide, you'll say, hey, isn't that the slide that Peter used about 3 months ago, 5 months ago in the atomic cross-chain transaction talk? And I said, I might go into some more detail at some point. This is the talk where there is more detail. Okay, elliptic curves. So elliptic curves obey this sort of equation. Y squared equals x cubed plus ax plus b. And so here's, from Wikipedia, here are some elliptic curves, plugging in various values for a and b. And so you end up with that general form. So another thing that you need to know about is finite fields. So this is essentially modulo numbers. And so you have integers which are in a range, say from 0 to k. K is usually a prime number. So you might have, say, 0 to 7 would be a toy case. And the idea is that addition and multiplication happens within that modulo arithmetic field. So 6 plus 2 would be 8. 8 modulo 7, so essentially 8 minus 7 is 1. So essentially the numbers wrap around at 7. So 6 plus 2 mod 7 is 1. And you could go 6 times 4, well that's 24. So 24 divided by 7 is gives you 3, and then you've got a remainder. And that remainder is what you get when you do a modulo. And so that's 3. So a lot of the EC curve stuff relies on this finite field mathematics. So, so that lovely graph there is using real numbers, where you can, numbers rather than just being integers can have, say 0.5. They can have, what's the term for that? Anyone? Fractions, yes, they can have fractional bits. So, as well as, so we've talked about finite fields, where essentially they're modulo numbers, and then you've got this thing called subfields and extension fields. So, if you've got two fields, so E and F, where E is a subset or equal to F, then, and if you could have all of the operations that happen in E are also work in F, then, but are restricted to E, then you have that F is an extension field of E and E is a subfield of F. So, for instance, if you remember, who remembers complex numbers from high school? Yes, I saw a hand. I saw 2 hands. This is good. All right. Complex numbers, rather than just having like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you can have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 plus, say, I. So it's sort of like having 2-dimensional numbers is how you can think of complex numbers. And so you can think that you can do all the equations you can do with normal real numbers inside the complex number space, but you can't do all the complex number space within normal real number space. So hence, the complex numbers is an extension field of real, and real is a subfield of complex. And the reason why I'm defining it now is so that then later when I say the word extension field, you'll know what I'm talking about. And Ben Edgington, who knows Ben? Okay, some of us know Ben. So Ben, who's done a lot of stuff in Ethereum, he said, well, you should explain what that is or just delete that word. And I said, well, you can't really delete the word because then you miss out half part of the talk. So I've explained it to you. So we said that elliptic curves, it's all about finite fields. So hence we've got that lovely equation that we had, y squared equals x cubed plus ax plus b. But that was real numbers. So now how do you actually apply it to integers, all these finite fields? So if it was a finite field with E prime 23, so in other words everything's modulo 23, then it would look like this. And I've borrowed this from Zircon's website. But so the idea is that you want to have points on the curve have to meet the curve equation. And so for instance, if you want to have 1 and 5, so this point here, then you've got to say, well, y, you substitute in for y, that's y is 5, so 5 squared modulo 23, so 25 mod 23 is 2, and 1 cubed plus 1, so that's going to be 1 plus 1 is 2, mod 23, 2 mod 23 is 2, so we've got 2 equals 2, so that works. Who knows what 18 squared is? Right, no, not all I. I could work it out, 180 plus 64 and all that. Yeah, something like that. But anyway, mod 23 is going to be a number. It's going to have to be 2, isn't it? Because this, as we know, equals 2. And so you end up with these points. And so all of those points appear, are points on the curve because they satisfy the curve equation. And the thing that's interesting is you've got 23 points here. So we were doing a finite field of, order 23, and now we have 23 points. So isn't that wonderful? And the other thing to look at, excluding this 0, 0, everything is reflective around that 11.5, like it's 11.5. So you could almost think of, if you did have negative numbers, you could all these would be like minus the number, but because we don't have negative numbers, then it's reflected over around, because it's modular. Does that make sense? So essentially,
I thought it was only reflected due to the nature of the initial equation. I thought some others didn't give you a reflection.
a different reflection.
I didn't think that reflected. You've done.
But I mean, you can see.
Yeah,
You can see visually that does.
This is what blockchain does for the elliptical curve for their signature. They have an x cubed minus 8 or plus 8 or something like that with modular 23.
Okay. I don't know. I believe you on that one. Yeah. Sounds good. All right. So the mathematics are going from this point here to the next point in the curve. Because don't forget, we've still got a curve hidden here. It's outside the scope of this talk. It's not that complicated, and you can look on Certicom's website to walk it through. But this point moved from here to the next point. It's complicated, and that's good because it's complicated. It means that people can't do things like the discrete logarithm of it. So it's complicated, which is good. But it's outside the scope of this talk. So now you know a little bit about elliptic curves, just the basis of it. So within an elliptic curve structure, you've got a base point, G. And from that point, you can generate all the other points in the curve. And so the order is the number of points on the curve. And so the private key, it's a number between 1 and the order minus 1. So you can think of that as a finite field, integer, with a limited range. And so the public key, P, is the private key multiplied by the base point. And so scalar multiplication, that's all about multiplying an integer by a point. Point addition, so you can add 2 points together and you will get another point on the curve. Point multiplication is not allowed, so you can't multiply 2 points together. But you've got to think that within the order of the curve, so along the curve, it is modulo the order of the curve. So hence, if you say had P1, and you had 2 times P1 is P2, and you had P3 which is 5 times, then P2 plus P3 is essentially 7 times P1. And 7 times P1 is going to wrap around to P1 again, because it's modular. And so for normal elliptic curves, we've got ECDSA. And that works in a very similar way to, how I showed digital signatures working before, where, you have some plain text, your message digester, you have your private key combined with your message digest, your signature, you send your message, your plain text, and your signature along, public key, your verifying algorithm, and then it's verified or not verified. So this is what, everything we've talked about so far is just basic digital signatures. But for what we're talking about with BLS, you need to have pairing-friendly curves. So you have an elliptic curve, and it has 2 groups. So 2 groups that are defined over finite fields, E1 and E2. And so E1 has essentially XY coordinates, and where each of the x and y are finite fields. E2 has two sets. So x has two sets and y has two sets. So you could almost think of it as, you know how in complex number you've got real numbers and then you've got complex numbers where you've got two elements for a complex number? Or if you've got Gaussian numbers, they're integers and you've got integer sort of plus I integer. So it's sort of a similar to complex numbers but just with integers. And so this is the same sort of thing, but each of them are just finite fields. And so the big thing to take away from all of this is E1 has got two elements, E2 has got four elements to represent a point. So that means that E2 points take up twice as much room as E1 points. E2 points take up twice as much room as E1 points.
What do you mean by room?
Storage.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you can think, say if it takes 32 bytes to store x or xc1, then you've got 2 times 32, or here you've got 4 times 32 bytes to store the point.
Right.
So the idea here is that the field of each series is an extension field of the field of E1.
Ooh, you're using the slide, aren't you? Yes. Or maybe you were ahead of me. But yes, I believe that is the case.
I think I'm hanging with you.
Yes.
Is it just like double the dimensionality?
Yeah.
Essentially? Okay.
Yeah, that's another way of putting it. But yes. Okay. And so we have G1 and G2 are subgroups with prime order R, and you've got GT is another subgroup, and of prime order R, and it's an extension field of G1 and G2. So essentially a multiplicative group. So essentially you multiply, then you get into that field. So E is this thing called a pairing function, and the idea is that you have a pairing of G1 and G2, so points on G1 and on E1 and E2 to get to GT. And so really what this allows you to do is effectively multiply. So you're not really multiplying, but it's a way of thinking of it, is you're effectively multiplying. So it's essentially saying, well, if I have a pairing of A times G1 and B times G2, and separately I've got a pairing of C times G1 and D times G2, if those two pairings are equal, then that implies that the point that A times B equals C times D, should have been another equals there. So that implies essentially the point represented by C times G1 and D times G2, when those two are multiplied together, multiplied with big inverted commas, then that equals this multiplication here. And so, we've suddenly gone from we can't multiply to, hey, we've got something that's a little bit like multiplication.
So Peter, so each of these groupings,
Yes.
E of A times G1, B times G2, etc., those two groupings. So those are both, they evaluate the points in the GT field.
What the result of that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And that's not us, is it?
Right.
Oh, that's the dental thing. There's a dental surgery sort of thing. Oh, golly.
I wasn't going to say that.
Even this
something
presentation's
happens
more like
smiles.
pulling teeth, man.
Yeah, everyone who's on the video, there's a dental surgery called something like Happy Teeth just over there at WeWork. Anyway, I still haven't quite come to grips with the idea of going to WeWork to have your teeth done. Anyway.
Are you sure? Because I don't hear any screams.
Then it wouldn't be happy teeth, would it? So
Yeah.
Yes, they're all smiling. Yes, you're right. And so each of these, don't forget that little dot is scalar multiplication, so they're points. And yes, you're right, that the overall, the evaluation of that pairing function results in a point on GT.
Okay.
What's the dimensionality of GT, or like is it double the size of the points in G1 and G2?
Ooh, you're asking tricky questions.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
It'd be an
But it
ex-
is an extension field. So it's
It'd
going
be
to
an
have to be bigger.
extension field
Ah.
with 1.5 times the size of E1 in this case.
I thought that that's the same order R.
That's not
So they
right.
are, that's, order R is the number of points on the curve.
Yeah,
Or
2.5
in the group
times the
rather,
size
the
of E1.
subgroup. But it's not, yeah. But don't forget the number of, how you represent the points. Yeah. Okay, so pairing curves need to have some special properties. Now I'm quoting this here from that paper there, and if you really want to dig into what those words mean, read that paper. Essentially, the take home is pairing friendly curves are special and they're rare, and normal curves that you're used to, like NIST's P256 or SEC P256K1, the one that we use in Ethereum and Bitcoin, they're not pairing friendly. So you can't just use them. You can't use any curve you like. And so there's AltBN128, and it's used in Zcash and Ethereum's scalar multipoint add and pairing functions. It's now only got 100 bits of security, so it's borderline not that good. You know, if you have a state-based actor, it's heading towards the point that they could, spend a few years to do an attack. But it's still pretty secure, but it's not, it's borderline. You'd be really looking for a 128 bits of security. So BLS 12381, it's been used for the Ethereum 2 signature aggregation, and using classical cryptanalysis, it's got about 127 bits. So that is based on this paper here, and notice that it's an IRTF draft at the moment. Once it makes it through the IRTF, maybe those numbers might change because people will argue that they're right or wrong. So, with a grain of salt, but I mean, someone who probably knows what they're doing, talking about, has done the analysis and said 100 bits, 127 bits. And this is due to some relatively recent attack and has reduced the security strength of them. Okay, BLS signatures. So, we've got a private key, similar to with normal ECC. It's between 1 and the order -1. The public key is similarly private key times the generator, and we have this idea of hash to curve. So H of M is actually a point on the curve, and so you've got the message to be signed, and you hash that message, and then you map it to the curve. And I've said map to curve with this throwaway, you just map it to the curve, and then I'll just hide here and hope no one notices, because you're all going, well, how are you going to map a integer to the curve? So a simple way of doing it obviously is hash of M, it's going to be an integer, and so you could go integer multiplied by the base point gives you a point on the curve. But that takes a lot of operations because you're doing a scalar multiplication. Another way you could do it is you could hash it, and then you could pop y into the curve equation, or x into the curve equation, and then come up with y and try and work out if it's a valid point. If it's not a valid point, you increment x. And then you keep on incrementing x until you find a valid point on the curve. And some people use that. And there's another one, a standard here, that has thousands of lines of algorithm, but is apparently really computationally efficient. So, yeah, multiple ways of doing it. And you've got a signature. So the signature is the private key times that point, the hash of M, is your signature. So the signature is another point on the curve. And then what you do is you check base point and the signature equals the public key and the hash. And so showing how this works, so we've got the base point and the signature, you've got the public key and the hash, and then public key, as we knew, generator times the private key. And these pairing functions will allow you to do, let's see, what are they? You've got associative and commutative. So you're allowed to move this multiplication from here to here. So that works with pairing functions. And so we've moved this from here to here, and then we said that the private key times the hash was the signature. And so, as we can see, it works. nice. It's actually quite straightforward, isn't it? So we've got the signature, the public key, the hash, and the base point. So, and we said that we GT equals that, so allows us to multiply those 2 points together. So the generator and the public key need to be on the same curve. So they could be on E1 or they could be on E2. So you could switch it around. So rather than being on E1, they could be on E2. And the signature and hash to curve, they could be on E2 or they could be on E1. So what this is telling you is that we had E1 had X and Y and E2 had 4 elements. And so what it's really saying is that you can make a choice. You could have bigger signatures and smaller public keys, or you could have bigger public keys and smaller signatures. So it's a design trade-off that you can do when you're designing your system. And so, if you're looking at BN 128, you've got 256 bits and 4 sets of 256 bits, so it's a trade-off. Okay, so now we know all about BLS, basic BLS. So Shamir is this really smart guy. So R, S, and A. And S is Shamir. And back in 1979, he wrote a little paper about 6 pages long, How to Share a Secret. And it's got 15,000 citations, something like that. So David, you've got to really put a good paper out to get 15,000. Yeah, and it must be one of the most cited papers ever. And so he talks about how to share a secret successfully. And so we're back in integer land now. This is a normal curve, and you've got, say y equals x squared, 3x minus 3. 3x minus 3. So, and as we know, given it's x squared, if we have 3 points, then we can define the curve, can't we? We can interpolate the curve just with any 3 points. Yeah. And then, you can have another curve, which again you can define, any 3 points will define the whole curve. And the thing to remember is that you can just add the equations together. So you can add the points together, so 7 plus 22 is 29. And equally, you can just go x squared minus 2x equals minus x squared, 3x plus 5x equals 8x, minus 3 plus 20, 17. So that you can add the equation, so add the coefficients together, and or you can add the points together. So that's something quite powerful to keep in your back pocket as something that to be able to do. And so with Shamir's scheme, you split up a secret into n shares. And the idea is any m of those n shares can be combined to yield a secret. So, and no information about the secret is revealed if you have less than n secrets. So no. So let's go back here. So what he's saying is, I've got this secret that's say minus 3. So, and what I want to do is I'm going to split up the, I've got say 4 people that I want to hand out the secret to, but I want to say any 3 of them have to work together to come up with minus 3. So I give one person 1, one person 7, and one person 15, and then and the other person 25. And as we know, any 3 of those 4 can then work together to come up with the curve, because they could derive the curve equation. So that's what essentially what Shamir said. So if you just use normal linear math rather than good old finite fields, it's eminently breakable by it. Whereas if you're using finite fields, you're all safe. And also large prime numbers and all the normal caveats. So with his scheme, you define an equation which looks a bit like that. So a plus a1x, so have coefficients and x to the n minus 1 mod p. So p is a large prime number, a0, so a0 is going to be the y-intercept. So if x equals 0, then the only thing you're going to be left with is y0 equals a0. So a0 is your secret. And m is your threshold. It's the threshold that you want to have, the number that you need to combine.
Peter, why is m not always equal to 3?
Why is m not always equal to 3? Because your threshold might be more than 3. You might have decided that you want to have 7 people or 2 people.
Yeah, I get that, but once you've got 3, don't you define the curve?
Oh, if it's just one of those quadratic ones, yes. It's
It's a high order.
It's a higher order curve.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's, yeah, so this
n plus 1, or n.
yeah.
Yeah, all right. So your order relates to the size of m that's possible.
Yeah, the order of the curve defines the threshold.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So you randomly generate your coefficients, and in the range, up to in your finite field, you securely distribute your shares, and then any of the n shares can combine with a0 to get a0. So that's essentially the scheme. So that's great, but if someone distributes a private share to you, how do you know it's really on the curve? Going to be part of this whole thing. Maybe they've been nefarious and they say, oh, look, I'm giving you this part of the overall key, but they're not. And so if you combine your key, your private bit with everyone else's private bit, it's actually not going to combine to something real. So how do you do that? You need to have verifiable secret sharing. And this is based on a whole heap of papers. So each node has their own x value. So x equals 1 to p minus 1. And you publish what your x value is. So this is my x value. So how you could do that is, how every node in an Ethereum network has its key pair, its node key. So you could have the hash of your node key. Could be mod p as your x value. You publish that. And then each node acts as a dealer. So think of it like a card game where you're dealing out things. And so the dealer generates that curve, that we had, the Shamir's curve. And the coefficients of the curve are integers, or within the finite field. And so you can consider them, though, to be sort of like ECC private keys. And the dealer needs to calculate the public versions of those private keys. So Fi is the base point multiplied by Ai. So you've got these coefficients and you're multiplying them. So essentially you've got the public version of these coefficients. Because you don't want to publish your coefficients because otherwise anyone can generate the curve. So you're getting a public verifiable value that you're publishing, and then people can determine, will have their AI value that they can then, or actually they don't get the AI value, but they can look at the FI value in the next slide. So each party acting as a dealer, the dealer then publishes commitment values, and then they publish their public values. And once they've published their public values, then the dealer needs to securely distribute the private shares. And then each node can then verify, so you do that, each node can calculate their private key as their share. So you remember how we had in this diagram here, so you get, say, from two different parties, two different dealers, I get 7 and I get 22. So I can sum those two together to get 29, and 29 is my private key share, just by adding up the integers. Okay. And then each node has these shares that it's getting from each party, and it needs to verify that no one's cheated. And so what it does is, so these are those public versions of the coefficients, and so it calculates the value given, so it's got an x value, so each node has an x value, so it calculates the public value at its x value. And that has to be equivalent to the base point times the share that it was given. So if it's given a certain share, that has to be equal to, when you interpolate in the public domain, using the public coefficients, the same value. So those have to be equal. And if they are, then you know that you haven't been cheated. And as I was saying, so the private key share that I have is the sum of all of the shares from all of the dealers. So, with the verifiable secret sharing, the big thing to think about is that you've got this private key that's now shared, and you know it's secure, and you never want to reassemble that private key. You know, you want everyone to have their private key shares, but when they sign something, you don't want them to all have to come together to sign. And so, so that the private key is never reassembled, but the private key is equivalent to the value at x equals 0. And you can calculate the public key by summing up all of those points, fi, for all the coefficients, and then working out what the public key is at x equals 0. So essentially doing the curve interpolation for the elliptic curve points. So that's all a bit, golly, what's this all about? So how you can think about this is that shares are distributed secretly to each node, and the coefficients are published as public values, and each node can verify the share is valid by checking that the public point that is equivalent to their share corresponds to the one where they can find it on the curve. So they can multiply it by the base point, and they can verify that it's a point on the curve. And each node calculates their own private key share by summing all of their secret shares. And so the overall private key is the private key at x equals 0. And the overall public key is by summing all of the public points and then interpolating back to 0. And so that's your public key. So now we've all got our private key shares and we've published our public key. And we're all feeling good. So we all remember that we've got this equation. So each node's got their private key share, and we've got that equation there. So each node, when it has a message that it wants to sign, you know, that the group are going to sign, it calculates HN. So they should all calculate exactly the same value because they're using the same algorithm. And then they've got their private key share, they multiply by the hash point, and that gives the signature share. So it's not the overall signature, it's just the share of the signature. And yeah, that explains that. So you then interpolate the overall signature using the signature shares based on the x value for each of the nodes, using Lagrange's interpolation polynomial stuff, which is that there. So essentially, you're summing up, and all of this, of course, has got to be mod p. But the big thing to think about is all of these numbers here are just integers, so that's, you know, not fancy elliptic curve maths, and it's only y, which is an elliptic curve point. So though it looks pretty scary, it actually turns out to be pretty straightforward. And then for verification, because we've got a single public key, it's just normal BLS verification. So that's nice and simple. So in Ethereum, we might all remember that there are some, there's an EC add, EC scalar multiplication, and EC pairing function for a single curve, and the OpBN 128. And so if you look at EIP 197, they explain why they chose just one curve. And it really comes down to, if you know, because you could have had a parameter which, you know, you passed in and it said which of the curves you want to choose between. So then they wouldn't be having the current problem they're having where the curve they've chosen has become weaker than it once was. But the concern they had was how much gas should you charge? So gas has to be related to the computational complexity, and so if they didn't want to have a precompile that you could execute and not know how much gas to charge. So that's what it came down to. Though I do ponder that maybe they could have had, for this precompile with this parameter, it's this much gas, and for the same precompile with a different parameter, it's a different amount of gas. But maybe there was no function that did that sort of thing at that time. But so you could verify one of these BLS signatures on chain, including a threshold signing one. And because you've got the pairing function, you've got the scalar mult and the point addition. The one caveat with the EC pairing is that it requires one of the points to be negative. So you would need to invert one of the points. And how you can sort of think of it is they want to end up with the value equaling 1. And if you do a negation, it's a bit like saying x times 1 on x equals 1. That's what they're aiming at. Yeah. So there is a conclusion. In conclusion, so threshold signing, which is a little bit complicated, but what it does is it allows you to spread your key, your private key, across multiple groups, multiple people, and then some subset of those people can work together without bringing their private keys together to sign a value. And then just using normal BLS verification, you can verify it. And you could verify it on chain. You probably wouldn't want to verify it on mainnet because you use a ton of gas. But if you're on a consortium chain, you wouldn't be quite so worried about that. So yeah.
Peter. So what happens if you have a Byzantine node that now has a portion, its share of the private key?
Yes.
And you get another Byzantine node that has its share of private key. How many of them do you need before you collapse the complexity of the key space?
When can you forge your signature? You need threshold number of private key shares. When can you stop a valid signature being produced? When you have M being the total, or N being the total minus M. So once you don't have threshold number of valid signers, you're not going to be able to sign stuff anymore.
No, I get that, but I'm wondering if you can't collapse the complexity of it. So you could, if you knew enough of the private key, you could maybe brute force find the private key that would produce a valid signature that you've already seen.
No.
There's going to be at some point less than the threshold value where that's true.
Yeah, no, that's Shamir's threshold scheme. It means you can't do that.
Okay.
You gain no information until you have the threshold number of shares.
Okay, I don't see why, but I'll believe Shamir or me.
Because so you're adding coefficients of to get to a final curve.
Yeah.
The coefficients that everybody else had could be anything within your finite field.
Right.
So you have no more information, so you're still not going to get that y-intercept because you won't be able to reinterpolate the curve.
Yeah, if you get points that are wrong, then it won't construct a curve. It's like you can't make a parabola with like
an incorrect curve.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just reduced it from an infinite set to a smaller infinite set.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the intercept will be curving away or differently to the true value. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to think that, even just if you think of y equals mx plus c, so nice and simple, we've just got a straight line. But of course, if we're in modulo arithmetic and large numbers, just because you know that x equals 1 is, say, 25, if it's 2 to the 256 numbers, x equals 0 can be anywhere, still anywhere in that range of 1 to 2 to the 256.
Yeah.
Still, you have no information whatsoever. It does take a bit of thinking to get to the point of going, I accept that that's true. But you'll play with it a bit, and you'll
No, I think that's good.
Thank you, Ed. All right. And thanks, by the way, to Roberto Saltini and Ben Edgington for their feedback on this talk. The next talk in 2 weeks' time, Rob Dawson and I are going to talk about ESSA and Pegasus Plus, and there'll be heaps more people to thank for that, because that's a complex topic. Not quite complex, but in a different way to this talk. Then we're going to have Babu, who's going to come up from Griffith University on the Gold Coast to talk about his PhD topic, blockchain digital assets. And then after that, we've got Horacio, who is on vacation at the moment, but he's going to come back and he's going to tell us all about precompiles and just RPC calls and how you can write your own, how you can add to BESU and create your own bits and pieces. David is going to talk about IoT two-factor authentication using blockchain.
It's easier than this, but
and then right at the end of the year, just before Christmas, I'm going to talk about Ethereum reorgs, forks, and selfish mining. So if anyone out there, I can see Jason's just saying, "Oh, I could do that talk." Anyway, so that's the current plan. We haven't published into January, February, but there'll be about a 4-week break or something like that over Christmas, New Year. So are there any other questions?
So again, what if you have a node that, so every node gets a copy of the base point, right?
Mm-hmm. Base point's public.
And the base point is combined with private key.
Your private key share, yeah.
The share?
Yeah.
Okay. So, what if that node was to publish the base point?
Well, the base point is a public value. So the base point is actually, so you're going to use curves that people have researched Nature Art Week, and they will actually have base points published, like in academic papers and in standards. So the base point isn't something you'd come up with yourself. That's something that generally you'd use a well-known one.
So everybody needs to know it.
Yeah, and everyone needs to know it. So it's like the curve parameters. It's just part of the curve, pretty much.
How can you not derive private key, or at least portion, from, like, how can the receiver not derive it if they have the base point?
Okay. There's this thing called the discrete logarithm problem. So essentially, even though you can, it's easy to say base point multiplied by an integer is a public key, point on the curve. It's impossible to go, all right, I've got the public key, I've got the G, the generator, the base point, and I can work out that integer, the private key.
It's not impossible, it's hard.
Yeah, it's two of the two. It's like more atoms in the universe, complicated. Using conventional, classical cryptanalysis techniques, it should take 2 to the whatever the security strength is. So 2 to the 127, which is a big
Isn't
number.
that the argument for using the finite field? The modulo allows you not to go backward.
Yes.
Sounds plausible, not sure.
So
Because you could have an infinite number of numbers that would get you back to that point.
Yeah.
But can't you use Shaw's algorithm to go into to do
there's someone
transform and some other stuff I saw on YouTube.
I've talked to someone who, for a very large company, did an analysis of the state of play on all of the quantum crypto. And I'm thinking maybe we'll have him do the January talk, but we'll have to get approval from a very, very large company, which you might not be able to get. But he could do a very, very interesting talk on that and his thoughts on how close it is and whether it isn't actually that close for really interesting reasons that aren't immediately obvious. But I can't remember whether it was all commercially in confidence when I was talking with him, so I'm not going to say it on a YouTube video.
Did you take your recorder off?
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, actually. So if you have the base point, can you multiply by any integer under the order of the curve, and then when you mod it, you get one of the valid points? Is that how it works?
Yeah, that's how it works.
Right, and so that's why it's the logarithm problem. Okay.
Yeah. And even if you multiply it by something bigger than the order of the curve, it'll just wrap around.
Right, but so you only get that many possible
Yeah, you only
which
get
is
that
why,
many
okay, right,
possible
right.
points.
And that needs to be big so that you can't
That's
just
that's why it's a large P prime.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that you have lots of possibilities.
Okay, well, look, thank you everyone for coming along, and I hope to see you in 2 weeks' time.